Welcome to Green and Gold FC.
Australia have done it! Can write the Matildas into history. Cue the party! The best team of the A-League era. And it goes. Oh! It's a save that means the world to Australia.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Green and Gold FC. We have essentially a geopolitics themed episode about the next year's World Cup and some of the logistics involved. And I'm happy to be joined by Mr. Clean Sheets, who's just been writing on this. His real name is Adrian. And of course, we are joined by my usual co-host in Alex. Let's start with Alex. How are you going?
I'm doing very well, Graham. Back to another episode, back to these regular podcast recordings. So absolutely loving it at the moment. And I'd say probably one of the toughest topics we've had to cover so far easily, both you and I on this pod. But looking forward to it. Always down to get into the nitty-gritty in terms of the world of football and all the surprises it decides to throw at us. So yeah, let's hope it's a good one.
How are you going, Adrian?
Very well, thank you, Graham and Alex. I guess that the first thing that I would say in dealing with this very, very difficult topic of the geopolitics of football and consequences for the World Cup next year is that it's almost a bit sad to even be talking about what it means for football when you think about the potential perils and consequences for the entire world at the moment, and in particular the Middle East, and also for people in America. Everybody is suffering very badly at the moment, and it almost feels like a little bit disingenuous to be worried about football when so many lives are on the line. Be that as it may, FIFA will be very, very focused on this very question right now, and they'll be watching very anxiously to see what transpires.
So let's start with the big picture. So I got an email this week, and obviously I don't want this to be a political podcast. There's enough politics in the world. It's in your face all the time, but sometimes it's kind of forced on us. So I got an email from my university and many places, this is not just my university, advising caution about going into the USA. If you have anything on your social media which has various political opinions, including about Trump or about particular hot button issues. On top of that, we have some countries are banned from going to the USA, I believe, including the Iranian national Iran, which is one of the teams which qualified. And we have an expanded World Cup, which makes it possible for countries like Iran and Israel to be in the same group, or USA and Iran, possibly some other countries at war. There's many countries at war at the moment. I know you're a lawyer by trade. Could you take us through, what's the cause of this, what's going on, and for travelers who might be interested in going to the World Cup as well, and how this could affect, both fans and the teams involved?
Well, that's a very, very big question. Excuse me. I don't pretend to be an expert on international law, and I don't pretend to be an expert on really any of the legal questions that currently front and center. To refer back to your comment about Iran having already qualified, and it's a bit problematic that they could even get into the country. America has various lists at the moment of levels of security and the extent to which citizens from those countries are already banned. I think it's something like 17 on the most banned list, and Iran is already on that list. But my understanding is also that it is possible to get exemptions for people from those countries, so that you're not automatically banned. You can still apply to have the ban overturned. And I would imagine that FIFA would be desperate for America to be doing the right thing as far as allowing football teams, players, officials and fans into the tournament. It is the World Cup after all. It's, yes, well, that's all I got to say about that. Alex?
Look, I do think it's going to be a big sort of problem, a big sort of question around the whole sort of, I guess, the logistics of how this whole thing is going to work. If you're asking me personally what I think will happen, I don't think the Iranian national team or any national team that does qualify will be banned from participating. I do think there's going to have to be a lot of heightened levels of security, obviously. And look, I'm not going to say that this has anything to do with sort of, well, this is to, you have to blame this side or that side, or you have to, blame the American government, or you have to blame this and that. This is something that was always going to happen. There was always going to be a situation going on in regards to politics. There always is. And FIFA has found their own ways to deal with this, whether it be the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine and how that affected the Russian national football team and even the Ukrainian football team for a while having to play their games away from home. team, this is going to be a really rough one, in my opinion. And I do think the Iranian team will get that exemption, as will any other team possibly on the ban list that does manage to qualify for the World Cup. I would not be surprised if we do see a lot of, I guess, Iranian fans being rejected entry into the country to come and support their team. And I do think that could be a major cause, not for concern, but maybe just for criticism, especially on an international scale towards the American government. And like we've said, we're not political, I guess, geniuses. We're not going to be able to sit on this podcast and tell you that, this is exactly how it's going to go and this is exactly how it should be. And this is what, one of the biggest governments on earth should be doing in regard to a major global political conflict. We're just football fans at the end of the day. But I think anyone with a brain can see, should I say, that this is a very complicated situation and it is not going to have an easy answer. It's really not. It's going to be a long, drawn out, strenuous process. If we can find a resolution for this where the Iranian team can get there safely, play out the tournament, return home with no problems, absolutely, that's the number one priority, I'd have to say.
Well, there's another corollary to the question is, obviously this very much depends on exactly how things play out politically between Iran and the rest of the world over the next 12 months. But is it possible that that the Iranian authorities would simply say, well, we're not going?
It could be a problem. That really could be a problem, yeah.
Potentially throws them into conflict with FIFA, because FIFA tend to get pretty upset about people pulling out of tournaments, even though nobody could possibly blame them, I believe, if they did not want to send their team and officials and fans to a country with whom they were at war.
Look, I do see that. At the same time, don't really look. I could see the possibility of it happening. I don't know how the Iranian government would benefit from that. And look, it may not be the right way to look at it, as if to, whether or not a country will benefit from a situation like this, because it is a bit of a tense situation, so you don't really want to look at it like that. But it is just global politics at the end of the day. Everyone's going to look to get in their own way and try to figure out how they're going to look the best and, how everything's going to work out for them. And I think overall, Iran on a larger scale, especially the players, would be looking to sort of use this tournament as an example to really put on a show and to make it known that they are a powerhouse team in Asia. And let's not forget the football implications here. Asian football teams, especially Middle Eastern football teams, have long been overlooked in these sort of international tournaments. And I think Iran will really relish at the opportunity to be able to prove a lot of people wrong. And it would be a real shame if they were unable to attend the World Cup and put on their best efforts. And look, I've talked with Jack from Deadball TV, a former guest of ours, a lot about Asian football recently, and him and I are both in agreement that Iran is continuing to be one of the best sides in Asia, one of the strongest countries in Asia. So to not have one of your best representatives at the World Cup is damaging not only for Iranian football, not only for the World Cup entirely, but it's seriously damaging for Asian football, especially if we do have to choose another representative.
I completely agree, and I think it would be tragic for Iran to miss out on the World Cup. They are a fabulous team. It's kind of bizarre that we haven't played them, I don't think, since 1997. I don't think we've played them since we joined Asia, have we? I'd be really interested to see how we went against them these days, but they are a powerhouse and Asia needs to be represented by its best, especially in this somewhat diluted competition where some of the less able teams of Asia are going to make it. And that includes Australia, really. It's scraping through only just.
Well, how much concern should there be about fan safety for people from countries such as South America, or people who have political opinions which are not agreeable right now in the USA, and of course, Iranian fans? Because I feel like if this was any other country apart from, say, the USA, or I guess there's a few other countries in the same category, but the USA is fairly unique right now in the fact that it's not a football nation. So if you go to a country with a bad human rights record, but they're football mad, then you expect them to just put whatever human rights issues they have on hold and for the sake of FIFA and just be really reverent towards the tournament and just let it go. The USA don't have that, right? And we had a journalist recently who got lined up and shot with a rubber bullet, which is going against normal international norms. Some of our news in Australia has been reporting lack of due process, immigrants being there, and also people being refused at the border because their social media is being checked. And I believe that includes Australians as well. Do we expect the USA to ensure a good experience for fans and fan safety? Yeah.
Well, America is a very, very wealthy country. It's an extremely well organized country, mostly. Did anybody else here go to Russia in 2018, for example?
Putin's football mad.
It was quite incredible. The only place I'd been in Russia was St. Petersburg before I went to Kazan to see Australia versus France. And Kazan, it's supposed to be the third biggest city in Russia. It's a third world place. Like everywhere you looked was broken glass and cigarette butts and concrete cancer and this magnificent 21st century stadium like growing out of the middle and all these wealthy people from overseas, including me, sort of lining up to have this amazing cordon bleu experience, surrounded by serfs, basically. So America is very, very different from that regard. I should imagine the security is going to be crazy. I mean, it always is. It was crazy in Germany. I was lucky enough to go to Germany in 2006, and the security was crazy there. It'll be 10 times that in America, I should think, next year. But people from South America getting in, there's going to be a lot of them. How many teams do South America have? Six and a half, I think. So that potentially means 7, and that's a lot of very passionate fans wanting to come. You can imagine there'll be some scrutiny there, but there'll be scrutiny on everybody.
Look, I think you make a good point in sort of saying that Russia sort of had this similar scrutiny in terms of their hosting situation. And we've had this a few times, especially with the last sort of World Cups and most recently in the last, I'd say, 2 decades with just the kind of hosting countries that we've seen for whether it's international tournaments in sport or whether it's stuff like the Olympics. I remember hearing back to all the stories of the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro, how for months beforehand, you have the government going through cleaning out dead bodies out of the rivers so that they could use it for rowing events. And look, it's a bit of a weird thing to imagine, but international sport truly has this way of just stopping time almost in terms of stuff like conflict. And I don't expect there to be no problems. Obviously, like we said, there's going to be plenty of logistical issues and sort of human rights issues that are going to be discussed by this. But there is a serious problem that FIFA does have, and it's, do you prioritize the growth of the game and the whole notion that, you do have to spread this game globally? Because if you do want to stick with that notion, you have to accept that not every culture is the same. There's a lot of cultures that are different. You had Russia, with all of its problems with, heightened levels of poverty in certain areas. You had Qatar with their huge issues of human rights abuses for immigrant workers, as well as their various problems with their views on homophobia and homosexuality, should I say. And look, even with America, as much as we want to say that America is, I guess, a more lenient country ideologically than a country like Russia or than a country like Qatar, you still do have high levels of violence in some areas. You do have over policing. You still do have people that will walk around carrying weapons, protected by their First Amendment rights. And look, I do think that this is going to be a serious concern, especially regarding fan safety. When we do have the chance of, rival fans going at each other. And look, I don't expect there to be too much of this because realistically, I think people are going to be sensible knowing that America is a very highly policed country, especially when they do hold major global events. I don't foresee there being any huge issues. However, there is the possibility that something will happen. And I think this is something that not only FIFA, but the United States government are going to take very, very seriously. And there's going to be serious implications for if anything does go down. Once again, God forbid anything does happen. But I know a few people myself that were planning on going to the World Cup in America, or at least thinking about it, that have now cancelled those plans just because there's so much uncertainty around the current political situation between America and Israel in the Middle East. It's hard not to sort of have that in the back of your mind when you do want to consider what the future of the World Cup in America is actually going to be like and whether or not it's still going to go ahead, whether they're just going to move the games to Canada, Mexico, whether they have to change it altogether. A lot to be seen within the next year. And if there are any serious implications as to games being relocated, how does that look for fans? How does that look for players and teams that are preparing to play out this tournament? It completely shuts down this whole concept of an American World Cup and kind of defeats the purpose overall in terms of FIFA's, I guess, attempt to grow the game in North America.
Yes, we're having the Club World Cup there right now, and there's been reports of ICE agents at stadiums. So I believe ICE is the immigration. I'm actually not sure what the acronym stands for, but they're basically looking for illegal immigrants. And there's been lots of reports that, and of course, it's hard to tell from this distance how accurate these reports are, but certainly in our media that there's been essentially fairly innocent people who just looked South American, got sent to South America, El Salvador prisons. And I don't know if there's any risk of that happening. I haven't personally heard about anything that in the stadiums. Like you said, that preventing fan violence, I think America would be very equipped to do that. But like, it's more the thing of will they allow fans in the country? Will the ICE agents treat them well? Is there a danger that they won't? And yeah, as I said, like as you guys said, of course, yeah, Russia or Qatar, there's major concerns there, but then they're going to make huge leeway for FIFA because footballs just can trump anything in a country. But a country like USA, where football isn't that important, are they going to be as flexible in changing their priorities? I guess that's just my concern, but maybe that's overblown. It's hard to tell how much our media is giving us the full picture, of course, from this distance. We are on the other side of the world.
It's also important to remember that 12 months out, the geopolitical situation is still very much in flux. So anything could change. I mean, when I wrote my article a week or so ago, they were still very much saber rattling. The bunker bombs had just been dropped. And it was a day or so later that that there was a bit of a suspension of hostilities, and we're all hoping that the ceasefire holds and evolves into something more permanent between Israel and Iran, and also Israel and Gaza as well. Really, the resolution of these problems is really more important than anything we're talking about in terms of football. Hard as that may be for us rusted on football fans to conceive of, but it is the case, I believe. But just to go back to your over-policing comment, Alex, I mean, really, if you want to see over-policing, all you have to do is go to a Melbourne derby or a Sydney derby.
Aussie fans will be used to it.
You get it at Perth Glory games now. I genuinely can't imagine. I can't explain to you the amount of times where I've seen, 40 people, half an hour before kickoff, having 40 or 50 people in the bay or the shed, and then seeing 10 police officers surrounding it for a game against, the Central Coast Mariners, as if something's going to kick off there. Yeah. It's disgraceful, honestly, the way football gets treated in Australia. And I do think that you make a good point about, if this does develop into something more permanent, what does that actually mean for the World Cup? What does that mean for sort of football going forward? Are we going to be able to, guarantee the safety of these teams participating in big tournaments? And I know that this was a big thing when considering Russia's punishment because of the war in Ukraine. Are we going to see Israel punished? Are we going to see Iran punished? Are we going to see, any of the countries involved punished and stuff like this? It's a lot of questions that it creates. It's very rare. I say very rare because it seems to happen all the time, but it's very rare that we see global conflicts this serious that, it's very rare that we see global conflicts so serious that one of the big questions being asked, especially by us as football fans, is how does this affect football? Like, I don't think we're realizing how silly it is sometimes that you have massive global conflicts going on, lives at stake, countries getting involved, the world at risk. And we're talking about how does this affect the World Cup in 12 months' time, which is really just bonkers to me. But it is a crazy thing. And, for a lot of people that do say, well, this stuff happening doesn't really affect us. Well, in a way it does. And I know that it's laughable for me to sit here and say that this affects us as football fans when you do have people really suffering. And obviously, I think none of us would ever try to make light of anyone's suffering by saying that anything that we go through as football fans is anywhere near as bad as what these people go through on a day-to-day basis. But even, for a football fan, having the thought of the World Cup, being relocated or, having games shifted around, or even for an Asian football fan such as ourselves who want to see the Asian Confederation do really, really well, this is a big hit for us. And I don't think that these continuous conflicts are going to be good for Asian football. I think it's going to damage it seriously on a global level, as well as, at the Asian level as well. What does happen if we see a ban on Iranian players playing in Europe, like we did when we saw the ban on North Korean players and some of their top players that had to leave Europe because they weren't allowed to play overseas anymore, or they wouldn't have countries that wanted to sign them, teams that wanted to sign them? It could have potential global implications, not only for the countries, but for football in general, is what I'm trying to say, at least.
So we have a couple of precedents. Let's go through them. So one is countries in deep conflict just boycotting. We know in Asia, Israel, whenever they were grouped with an Arab country, the Arab countries would boycott. And I believe you know quite about the history here and how FIFA dealt with that. Can you take us through that? Actually, that affected Australia as well. Can you take us through that and perhaps...
Yeah. He preempted these comments with saying this is my observation rather than necessarily being any kind of, having any factual basis in terms of policy. But back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, the Arab teams absolutely refused to play Israel. So Israel was not allowed to join the Asian Confederation. And had yet to be accepted into the European Confederation. And so what FIFA did in order to make sure that Israel never got to the World Cup, or so it appeared to me, was to get them to play the winner of the Oceania, because Oceania had no power to politic otherwise, to get them to play the winner of the Oceania Confederation, and then the winner of that game would have to then play a fifth place getter or whatever from Europe or from South America. And what this effectively meant was that Israel was locked out of the World Cup because they would always have to play somebody from Europe or South America if they were going to get there. But it effectively meant that Australia was locked out of the World Cup because we had to get past Israel before we could play a South American powerhouse, as we did against Argentina in 91. And as we did against Scotland, who knocked us out in 85 before the 86. I remember saying when we were playing Scotland, we lost 2-0 at Hampton Park. And we were still in it at 2-0 down. It wasn't too bad. And every football lover in 1986 was saying, come on, let's play them at Darwin, at midday. And no, stupid Football Australia or whatever they were called back then, played them at 8 o'clock at night in winter in Melbourne. And we got a 0-0 draw. I remember John Kuzmina missing a couple of sitters, and we really could have won that. But anyway, that game was all about keeping Israel out.
So I guess one possibility is we could see boycotts. Another precedent we have is Ukraine and Belarus were not put in the same group. I don't know if we could have something like that where the draw gets a bit biased so that we don't see countries in conflict in the same group, whether that's Israel and Jordan if Jordan makes it, or Iran and Israel, or Iran and USA.
If Israel gets through, they have to play whoever they're drawn against. They can't rig the draw.
And even if you do, you can't rig the round of 16.
How are Israel going these days as a football team?
Yeah, not amazing. Yeah. But, a chance, right? I mean, it is an expanded World Cup, so it is a chance. And of course, that sounds tough.
Have they ever made the Euros? I don't know that they have.
But the USA, of course, is harder to avoid being drawn with a group like Iran or whatever, because they're hosts and therefore a seeded country. So that's going to be interesting. So let's finish with this. We've talked about some anxieties about fans and obviously some anxieties about global conflict, which is obviously much bigger than football. But if I could talk about something much smaller than football, is it going to affect either of your decisions to go to the World Cup? Or what would affect your decision in the next 12 months?
Well, I've got 2 overseas trips planned for next year anyways. That already lets me out of the World Cup. I'll still be watching avidly.
If I gave you free tickets, would this affect your decision?
I don't know. I love going to World Cups. I've been lucky enough to go to 2, and I was very much looking forward to the World Cup next year. It's almost too early to say. There's 12 months to go, and there's so much more yet to happen that could swing a person's decision either way.
How about you, Alex?
Well, you'll get there one day, Alex, and I can tell you that going to a World Cup is like going to the best ever party ever. It is just amazing. And I thoroughly understand why anybody would share your opinion and want to go, irrespective of the dangers and the politics and all the rest of it. I will never forget Germany in 2006. was a confluence of Australia not having been there for 32 years, and I'm old enough to have lived all of those 32 years, and just the depression every single time. It just destroyed me every time when we didn't make it, especially the Iran game.
Well, to answer my own question before, I'd say I'd be looking very carefully at how fans go at the Club World Cup. I don't know if we have any. I don't think we have any Iranian teams there, but we do have South American teams. We do have teams from the Middle East. So that treatment will set a precedent, and we'll be able to get a very clear idea once this tournament's over, exactly what the situation is, how much USA is going to respect FIFA and how much it respects protocols, and how fan safety is. Of course, it'd be a lot more peace of mind if we saw an Iranian team there. So we had a very, very like-for-like example, but we'll see. Well, anyway, thanks so much for joining us on a much more serious episode of Green and Gold FC. Sure, many people have comments. I hope we managed to get through this without being too political. We understand many of you have very passionate opinions at home, as do we, but we prefer to keep this as a football podcast. And yeah, so please, if you have a comment, please comment either on Twitter or on greenandgoldfc.com. And don't forget, we are available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. So please hit like and subscribe. It really does help us out. But that's all we have time for this week. Until next time, it's bye for now.